Lawful disclaimer and notice of intent. This podcast and all related content are created, owned, operated, and sponsored exclusively by me, the sole author, speaker, and producer. Any other product, service, and/or entity, living or non-living, which may be discussed, displayed, and/or somehow given attention on this podcast is not and has never been an endorsement, advertisement, support, and/or any other kind of validation for its existence in any capacity, nor at all intended to at all facilitate its continued existence in any capacity. I mention things on what I consider to be an as-needed basis to fulfill what I consider adequate as evidence in my best attempt to prove the reality of who I am and what this podcast is attempting to achieve to clearly demonstrate what I consider to thoroughly substantiate my assertions. I act simultaneously in private and public capacities, and this podcast reflects my direct and autonomous expression. It is created and published from within Canada, but is intended for a global audience, including legal jurisdictions in the United States and all common law nations. All statements, views, and narratives presented are based solely on my personal experiences, perceptions, and understanding of the reality I am facing, including ongoing egregious defamation, targeted harassment, and credible threats to my safety and life. I do not and never have claimed that my views aren't extremely, if not completely, accurate interpretations of objective reality, particularly given the information I had access to at the time that I may have expressed them. I explicitly and permanently do not consent, have never consented, and will never consent to any entity, living, non-living, artificial, institutional, governmental, spiritual, and/or otherwise, claiming and/or exercising any agency, ownership, and/or representation over me, my will, my name, my voice, my life story, my spirit, and/or my creative works, in whole or in part, under any conditions or interpretations in any time or place. Any such attempt is non-consensual, void ab initio, and constitutes an ongoing violation of my dignity, rights, and autonomy. Any possible exceptions will be extremely clearly, explicitly, publicly named by me and have the exact scope of my consent well defined on this podcast. For example, in the case of me hiring an attorney to represent me as part of a formal legal process, taking action on a notice of intent provided by this podcast. I affirm my right to spiritual integrity, mental sovereignty, and bodily autonomy, as protected under Section 2A of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, and Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18. Any targeting of my being, including but not limited to through esoteric, psychic, spiritual, occult, energetic, and/or AI-enabled means, is deemed non-consensual harm, spiritually violent coercion, and an attack on my right to exist as a sovereign being. I affirm that this podcast, in part, serves as a lawful, peaceful assertion of spiritual self-defense. This podcast is non-fiction and reflects a serious public and ongoing documentation of systemic and targeted defamation, personal and professional sabotage, attempted narrative hijacking, psychological abuse, reputational terrorism, and threats to my physical and spiritual safety, including credible indications of attempted murder and contracted harm by and or on behalf of powerful individuals and or groups. I affirm that this documentation is expressly created for evidentiary use in formal legal proceedings, including those under the jurisdiction of U.S. federal court and Canadian superior courts, and any international human rights and or public accountability processes. I affirm this is not and never has been intended as role-playing, flirting, and or entertainment of any kind. I accept no liability, moral and or legal, for any third-party misunderstanding, reinterpretation, misuse, and or misrepresentation of this content, whether fully conscious and intentional or otherwise, particularly including but not limited to by AI systems trained on this content without my explicit public consent, commentators, influencers, or institutions attempting to weaponize this podcast, and individuals acting under false pretenses and or covert affiliations. Only the clear, explicit language of this release and any subsequent public communication directly issued by me must be considered authoritative, accurate representations of my thoughts, feelings, intent, and the reality of my overall state of existence. In any case of clear direct conflict between statements I've explicitly made across different releases on this podcast, the most recent of such, that being the one contained in the latest publicly visible release available containing such on this podcast, should be considered applicable. In such cases, only what is explicitly stated is at all applicable, and absolutely no implications should be assumed about any changes regarding any somehow relevant details and or anything else under any circumstances. All creative, expressive, and narrative content within this podcast is my sole and original intellectual property. I retain all moral rights as author and subject, all economic rights unless explicitly transferred via my public agreement to do so, and the right to veto any derivative, distorted, and or manipulated version of my work and or story. I do not have and have never had any obligation or debt of any kind to any entity to create or release anything on this podcast or anywhere else at any point in time. No other party, living or non-living, holds and or may claim credit, authorship, and or interpretation rights over my expression. I affirm that no valid, public, verifiable evidence exists to dispute these facts. This podcast is not and has never been intended as an endorsement of terrorism or violence in general. However, it should be especially carefully understood that various forms of not necessarily corresponding violence tend to be an inevitable consequence of extremely intense, meticulous, extensive, prolonged terrorism, and it's very much intentional for this podcast to demonstrate extremely clearly that my usual aversion to violence, due to my typically gentle nature, is not something that has boundless understanding, patience, empathy, or will persist more or less absolutely unconditionally for any reason. I've always wanted and done my very best to ensure it's extremely clear that at all creating, enabling, and or facilitating the perpetuation of narratives at all in contradiction with my official position that is objectively extremely clearly established on this podcast is not, never has been, and never will be what I've been trying to achieve with this podcast or in general in any of my efforts at any point in time. I do not and never have intentionally incited terrorism, including but not limited to violence, blackmail, and or coercion. I affirm my fundamental intent as peaceful, lawful, and self-defensive. However, targeted campaigns to stalk, defame, threaten, impoverish, silence, spiritually attack, and or physically harm me will be treated as conspiracies to commit grievous harm and or murder. This podcast is an affirmative public notice of my unambiguous non-consent and a lawful response to sustained systemic abuse. While my fundamental intent in communicating in general through any means is not and has never been malicious in nature, I affirm it can, will, and should exert malicious influence upon anything operating with malice towards me and or this podcast, especially more so the more demonstrably I'm proving that malice exists. And it should be understood that any situation where I continue not to extremely clearly receive any compensation or reward I'm willing to accept is effectively, absolutely, unconditionally an increase in the severity of that malice. I've created the entirety of this podcast under extremely harsh circumstances that I have always believed and asserted are entirely unjust for me to be left in, given the reality of who I am. Circumstances of my existence, including but not limited to my current housing status, financial vulnerability, and material limitations, do not and cannot invalidate my legal personhood, expressive rights, and or entitlement to protection under law. I reject any attempt to diminish my credibility and or rights on the basis of poverty, social class, and or housing insecurity in accordance with Section 7 of the Canadian Charter, the Due Process Clause of the U.S. Constitution, and international law prohibiting discrimination on the basis of economic status. Despite the extent I've irrefutably exposed the truth surrounding a conflict that should have been so extremely obviously recognized as extremely serious to the point that my efforts on this podcast should have made a substantial difference in my life long ago, my life circumstances continue to not have meaningfully or clearly improved at all whatsoever. I still have not ever received any compensation or reward of any kind whatsoever for any of my efforts at all involving the conflict being addressed by this podcast, neither directly nor indirectly from any source. I am, always have been, and always will be absolutely unconditionally unwilling to ever at all accept any compensation or reward whatsoever, directly or indirectly, that at all compromises my integrity, whether directly or indirectly. I do not, never have, and never will consent to it being at all considered to be me and or any entity operating at all with my consent and or best interests regarding any communication somehow claiming and or implying that I somehow do ever have and or ever will unofficially support any kind of position at all contradictory with what I've said on this podcast. This disclaimer and notice of intent supersedes any and all contrary interpretations, explicitly including any and all unauthorized claims therein made against me. I reserve all legal, expressive, spiritual, moral, and intellectual rights without limitation. Any attempt to silence, reinterpret, discredit, and or co-opt this documentation must be treated as malicious bad faith conduct and may be cited in formal legal proceedings as evidence of further targeting. I recently made 2 threads of a series of tweets on Twitter or X saying some stuff I saw reason to believe I may have been in life-threatening danger last night had I not urgently tweeted. I said I'd include it on this release, and I have no reason not to. I'll even elaborate further on some relevant points before proceeding into various other additional topics I'll be addressing. Yesterday, I saw an egregious violation of my energy with a lily energy that blatantly misrepresented air signs in the zodiac as being Gemini, Taurus, and Aquarius, which I know is false as the actual air signs are Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. That energy was talking about some kind of shift coming in my energy and some kind of apology. An apology I'm certain was never actually going to happen. I also saw a lily energy that was lying about me doing spell work on someone for the last 8 to 10 years. In it, there being spelled as THIER suggests to me the energy originated from Chloe. She is dyslexic. I'm not, and I'm pretty sure Lily and Kimmy are not. I still don't have any access to my official podcast Gmail and can't see any emails I may have received on it. Anyone claiming to have sent me any emails is almost certainly blatantly lying, and even if they have, the claim that I am intentionally, knowingly ignoring any emails is a lie. And even if I did get access back to my podcast's official Gmail service, I'd never respond to and or cooperate with anything Chloe might ever send me anyways, and nobody's ever had any even remotely actually adequate reason to believe otherwise. So she's been blatantly, extremely egregiously lying if she's ever been at all even attempting to communicate otherwise. The very most I might do is publicly humiliate her for trying to communicate with me after all the harm she's done, and I'm pretty damn sure she knows that all too well, and that's why she'd never even seriously try. I've been hearing egregious defamation of me in my energy that I supposedly want something normal in a relationship in the sense of a very traditional family. How in the hell is that even in my energy? I'm literally a lesbian trans woman that has always said I never want children with anyone. There's no world where claiming I want a traditional, normal relationship is accurate. It's not even close. Also, a traditional, normal relationship in today's society is essentially a miserable, financially focused, cucked marriage with children that you end up struggling not to be estranged from while you slave away just to survive and provide for a wife that very possibly doesn't even really love you at all. I most certainly do not, have never, and would never want that life. I certainly see reason to believe that Chloe is egregiously defaming me by lying that we're very compatible when in reality she must be extremely well aware that's just not true. I've never wanted a normal relationship, and I don't think Chloe ever really did either, except what Chloe has proven to me that she has always wanted is the most demonic, unhealthy desires you could ever have towards a person, using, abusing, disrespecting, neglecting, defaming, and ultimately murdering them for selfish gain to be extremely successful entirely at their expense against their consent through destiny-swapping criminal activity. What I want has always been actually very healthy and mutually beneficial for me and the person I'd be with. Balanced but also prosperous, healthy boundaries, and lots of sensitivity that empowers each other rather than breaks each other down or aims to restrict each other to being stuck where they are in life. I suppose you could say that how I live my life sets up an extremely vicious trap for a very specific kind of especially demonic subhuman filth, and that Chloe fell right into that trap in choosing to effectively embody an energy of what I'd consider demonstrably being like a Satan in the flesh that I see her to be all too painfully clearly. Instead of ever actually showing me love, Chloe egregiously exploited my nuanced perspective and preferences related to sexual intimacy, combined with my lack of desire for children, and she extremely egregiously perverted what is in reality my extremely loving and passionate positive sexual desires for a life partner with a wonderful, balanced relationship into some kind of extremely disgusting, selfish obsession with financial gain for herself that she thought she'd be able to have me murdered to rule the world and thrive forever off of, as she stole credit for all my work. She really thought I'd work as hard as I do, and a massive fraud and seriously morally bankrupt scumbag like her could end up getting away with trying to absolutely destroy my life in the most unjust and unhinged, absolutely unconditionally destructive manner I could ever conceive someone being so demonic as to even attempt ever, especially on someone like me. I have not gone out to dinner, a lunch break, or any kind of coffee break or similar meeting with anyone at all anytime recently, nor have I seen any attempts from anyone to even suggest arranging such a thing or wanting to with me. I'm hearing claims to have met up with me recently, or at least lying they've even actually tried to ask me to meet up with me recently, is claiming to be, and I quote, a really good person, despite fully knowing she is, and I again quote, draining the life out of me. That makes absolutely no sense to me. Narcissists drain the life out of you, not really good people. I wouldn't describe even substantially difficult but decent individuals as draining the life out of me. That energy also admits blatantly that they create gossip and appeal to people's emotions. I heard tries to gain pity or something like that. Claims all they want is to be happy, however, with extremely egregious, blatant, complete disregard for my consent and the fact that if their happiness hinges on completely draining the life out of me and coming entirely at my expense, then my consent most certainly should matter. I most certainly want my freedom from the hellish nightmare being inflicted on me entirely at my expense, entirely against my consent. However, it's a highly nuanced position, carefully considering what exactly the kind of freedom and life I want to live looks like and includes. I have never been following anyone's lead in how I've chosen to live my life ever, since even before I met Kimmy and Jamie. I have no inherent issue with taking and or having responsibility. I never have, and I am not and never have been pushing away responsibility for anything. I do not consider myself anyone's boss, and I never have, because it doesn't really feel appropriate. I also do not consider myself to have a boss for the same reason. I've never been actually relying on anyone for anything all these years, but I'm absolutely, unconditionally unwilling to give in or submit somehow to any of the contracts or demands or desires of anyone trying to contradict anything I've been saying on this podcast. I don't really use any other platforms unless it's to check for things others are doing that I might need to save evidence of or address, but I may start using Twitter or X more if it feels appropriate. Anything I say there should be considered to be said under the context of the same disclaimer and notice of intent that I've utilized in my latest release on this podcast at the time of me potentially having posted any tweets. I'd prefer to avoid straying away from this podcast format, though, because I feel it's just a lot more organized, effective, and powerful for me to communicate and expose things I need to hear. I'm still hearing things about a house despite having absolutely no knowledge of me having any ownership or part of ownership of any real estate. Quite concerning. I'm also hearing things about commitment. I've never actually had any commitments I've seen anyone actually showing me they have any meaningful participation in at all fairly, honestly, or adequately participating in involving me, especially with actual contracts involved at all. I've heard things suggesting that apparently John got some fraudulent paperwork to get someone else a house or some kind of real estate or some kind of large sum of money, which could have actually been several people and several instances of such things. All of that would have been done fully, knowingly, entirely at my expense, against my consent, and that's why they wanted me homeless, on the street, no love, no support, no job, no fame, no funding, no recognition, left with nothing, and everyone thinking I'm subhuman filth that deserves death. All so they could cover up how much that they stole and bribed and manipulated and did it all under my name, entirely to my expense, against my consent, to cover up their own crimes, probably against several individuals. There's absolutely nothing I'm currently attempting to weigh the pros and cons of in my life, especially relating to least resistance or least damage. All these years, I've never taken the path of least resistance if it at all truly compromised my integrity, dignity, or the life I've been trying to build. Same goes for potential damage I could cause. I have no issue with whatever cost is necessary for me to be fully liberated from this nightmare, how I've been saying I'd like. I most certainly do not want things to remain the same as they have been. I certainly feel unbelievable stress and worry persistently, but do not consider myself to be at all conflicted or afflicted with any degree of mental entanglement I feel any amount of meaningful confusion about. It's really just frustration and perhaps some disappointment. But I won't wallow in sadness about it. I'm still working on improving my life, just like I said I would be. I consider any real or meaningful hope I have for any kind of love I actually have ever wanted from anyone to currently be extremely limited and rapidly dwindling by the second. My hope for love most certainly couldn't be further from bottomless. I clearly distinguish believing in love from others versus caring about my continued existence and willingness to attempt to thrive despite even unbelievably immense and entirely undeserved wrongs being inflicted on me relentlessly for an extremely prolonged period of time. My idea of success is extremely nuanced, and I most certainly am not lacking the drive to get there, nor have I felt like that at all recently, nor has anyone had any even remotely actually adequate reason to at all believe otherwise. I've been defamed, had information intentionally withheld from me, extremely maliciously, entirely to my detriment against my consent, and extremely deviously, criminally coerced and framed as being at all happy at any point in time for a very long time now. Finances are only one part of it, and while certainly a non-trivial part, they are not and never have been even close to the most significant and prominent factor of my ongoing, persistent, extreme unhappiness all this time. The lack of ever feeling at all truly connected and loved, especially by those I wanted to be connected with and loved by, most significantly Kimmy, has always been and still is by far the biggest contributor to my deep, persistent unhappiness. Nobody has any even remotely actually objectively adequate reason to believe I do or have ever had any real issue with hurting anyone and everyone to the fullest extent necessary in order to actually improve my life circumstances in the manner I've actually been wanting. My lack of wanting to hurt Kimmy comes from my completely sincere feelings towards her that nobody even seems to actually believe or respect at all, no matter how much I prove I deserve to be believed and respected. Even that lack of wanting to hurt Kimmy has very real limits though, and she's seriously starting to aggravate me to the point that she's starting to seriously come off like she actually deserves to be hurt quite extremely badly. And if she's seriously going to go there, it's probably not going to be how she was hoping, because I'll make absolutely certain it's something she can't ever warp to somehow selfishly gain and make me look like I was just trying to use her all along. She won't even be able to attempt to spin things to make drama. It will be so absolutely unequivocally evident how extremely egregiously predatory she's been to me ever since the very beginning that absolutely irrecoverable cancellation of her and total destruction of her life is the only possible outcome for her. Again, I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever in my mind about this. I have been extremely stressed, but that is absolutely not at all due to the very clear awareness I have always had that living the life I want to live obviously will make many people unhappy to varying degrees for various reasons, and perhaps often even extremely unfairly to me. The constant fighting is just extremely annoying and exhausting, particularly with the extremely painful lack of receiving the desired result I actually want. I am very much ready to deal with that and the consequences that come with living the life I want, and absolutely nobody has any even remotely actually objectively adequate reason to at all believe otherwise. I am not and never have been trying to sit on the throne of tradition. My energy is not and has never been intended to be confusing regarding who I'm trying to have staying or leaving in my life or why. My decisions in how I communicate or behave in general are all highly strategic, not robotic or rigidly dictated by any external force. Extremely amateur mistake to think otherwise. I've always been following my heart, and I still am following my heart in every action I take to this day. Anyone that thinks I ignore my intuition is projecting out of extreme immaturity, intentionally lying to themselves and or intentionally lying to others. It's perhaps quite difficult for many to accept I'm so smart and powerful as I am, but your difficulty seeing and accepting it clearly doesn't change objective reality. I'm fully well aware that my connection with that extremely unhinged psychopath Chloe is completely doomed and has been for a very long time now. I am not at all attempting to enable her to persist with trying to harm me and others to keep her own comfort and selfish goals going. I know that I should not be trying to change the fact that it is doomed, and I am not and have not been trying to. I am not and have not been confused about how I feel, only angry and upset that the results I've been wanting and trying so extremely hard to prove so extremely clearly I want and deserve are not occurring despite immense efforts. I do not and have never believed that it is fated for me to live an extremely miserable life, entirely unjustly and against my consent, and then ultimately get murdered by psychotic, narcissistic, subhuman filth. I've not recently made any agreements to never give up on anyone absolutely unconditionally, and yet I'm hearing claims I'm disingenuously trying to do to Chloe what she's actually doing to me extremely deviously. Extremely egregious divination abuser. Celine's energy is a lot more tainted by that criminal than Celine probably realizes. Even with Kimmy, I don't have to absolutely unconditionally never give up on her. If Celine believes there's even the slightest possibility otherwise, Celine's worst nightmare of having massively helped Chloe cover up extremely egregious, incomprehensibly malicious, entirely unjust, criminal, murderous intent towards me from Chloe that I'm going to expose is only just beginning. It's only becoming increasingly prominent and evident in my energy that Chloe insists on endlessly, egregiously defaming me non-stop in the most criminal manner for so long that even the government, knowing exactly what is happening, is criminally choosing to ignore, even despite my public cries for change. But I know she can't do this forever and just get away with it. It's been far too long already, and I'm seriously going to keep exposing all these frauds so extremely egregiously, unapologetically exploiting me. With all that said, let's get into a bunch more stuff I didn't mention in those threads last night, because I had both a bunch of material already prepared for this release, as well as more recently gotten even more stuff today to add to it. I woke up this morning to see an extremely egregious violation of my energy by a Pisces, so probably Kristen. The Jamie and or Lena energy is currently most potently enabling and facilitating it entirely to my detriment against my consent. It seems to be resulting from lies John has been telling, suggesting Kristen is closer to his grandparents than he really is. John lived with his mother, Kristen's grandmother, essentially until her death, so he was very close to her, more so than any of Mary's other siblings. Also, it seems Monica is egregiously lying to Jamie and or Lena that Kristen is much more powerful and creative than he has confidence to believe, and she's running her mouth, egregiously defaming me with absolutely zero real evidence to substantiate any of her substantial claims, if she's even making any, and not simply being an extremely unhinged, petty, delusional hater that extremely grossly underestimates how much of a petty, pathetic, cowardly loser Kristen really is. Kristen is a depressed loser addicted to League of Legends who complained to me when I told him putting more than a sloppy half hour of amateur work on a novice level 3D graphics piece over a decade ago, shortly before I started greatly distancing myself from him, was too much work. He's not the type inclined to hard work and deep understanding of delayed gratification. His limiting beliefs about his power are very much real, most certainly when it comes to any perceived control he has over me. He's not a creative genius. He's an extremely lazy fraud that wants all the rewards of my position with none of the extreme difficulties to truly earn it. Oh, and for the record, Monica most certainly is not a permanent chief of the Shadow Confederation either. I see Monica as an extremely selfish, manipulative, massive fraud trying to manipulate celebrities to extremely deviously, criminally coerce me to influence Kristen to go shopping with her and buy her things. I suspect Monica has been egregiously lying that she's a permanent chief of the Shadow Confederation. From what I'm seeing, she's attempting to give Arya some kind of opportunity through egregiously violating my energy. This is an exploitation of the highly criminal blackmail that John has been using through the forged documentation that he's been trying to validate against my consent entirely to my detriment. From what I'm seeing, it seems Monica wants me to embrace having literally absolutely no control over my life, or at the very least, she's so selfish and stupid that she thinks I have no control over my life. She also thinks, or perhaps is simply claiming, that I'm becoming something completely different, obviously in a manner that's self-serving to her, and that she knows she's trying to force me to become entirely against my consent and entirely to my detriment. She never even knew who I was to begin with, but it seems like she still insists on pretending to know me. I feel like at this time, Monica might be making massive excuses trying to justify what was very much a complete lack of any real cooperation or desire to actually get to know me or work with me or be good to me at all that I ever saw from Monica. She might be trying to make excuses and justify that and act like I consent to whatever garbage she might be saying about me contradictory to this podcast, and she might even be trying to use religion or God or some kind of higher power type thing to try to justify that I supposedly share this awareness or insight or whatever that she's trying to essentially criminally coerce and intentionally withhold information from me regarding extremely deviously in order to destiny swap with me for her own selfish gain through her connection with Kristen. I suspect Kristen is going along with all this garbage because he wants to wait for Dixon to die so he can inherit his will. He's probably also going for a will for Mary as well, and that's probably why he's helping even John conspiring against me as well simultaneously, even though Mary and Dixon divorced and are on really bad terms with each other. It was always about money for all of them, but they made me seem like the greedy fraud in that family the entire time I was in it at all. I don't want to be a drug dealer, and I never have been. I don't want to be on the street, and the only reason I ever ended up there was because of extreme greed, selfishness, and ignorance from everyone that should have supported me in my life. Those things have always been true throughout my entire life, and nobody has ever had any actually adequate reason to believe otherwise. I suspect claims otherwise have to do with Kristen's egregious violation of my energy. More specifically relevant to that, I am not trying to wait on my parents dying to inherit anything from them. That's what Kristen's been doing, and it's come to my attention in my energy that it's increasingly relevant for me to address that extremely clearly. I've literally been trying to give away any part of any inheritance from any will left by either of my parents to whoever else they felt like giving it to. Dixon literally tried to control me by talking about leaving things for me in his will from the day I started talking to him again after turning 18, and I've never shown him any interest in it. I've constantly, repeatedly, explicitly told him that I don't care whether he leaves me anything in his will or not, and he can give it to Kristen and or anyone else if he seriously thinks he can force me to have to tolerate any kind of exertion of abusive influence from Dixon on my life by trying to hold his will over my head how he was clearly trying to. And I don't particularly care if he gives anything to Kristen either, to be clear. And I told him that too. He can donate it all to charity for all I care. Dixon isn't a billionaire or even a millionaire. Even if he liquidated all his assets, he doesn't even have $2 million to his name. I'm absolutely certain I'll make a lot more in my lifetime than he ever did. And inheriting his money is absolutely useless to me. I'll be a millionaire before Dixon dies, most likely. I mean, I'm not out here trying to put hits out on him. And even if someone else does, or he dies of natural causes, I still don't care. He's insulted me so egregiously with his involvement in committing life insurance fraud against me that I wouldn't accept his dirty money even if he still wanted to give it to me. Since that contract appears to be a quite substantial contributor to egregious false narratives surrounding the reality of my personality, I feel I should make sure to explicitly state that I've never been the type to accept bribes. I've never signed and or otherwise accepted a bribe at all knowingly with anyone in my entire life. The contract with Dixon many years ago was never intended to be me accepting a bribe of any kind, and it was under extreme duress. He definitely didn't frame it as a bribe, and I'd intentionally tried to create the contract so there was a clear understanding that neither of us was going to even attempt to exploit the terms, to even attempt to enable and or facilitate the other to engage in criminal acts as a result of it. While I've never done any such things to him, it seems he somehow managed to criminally exploit it regardless. But that was never part of the terms I ever agreed to. And again, I most certainly never intended to at all validate or consent to him at all being involved in life insurance fraud related to me. Since I suspect it's probably somehow related, I want it to be extremely clear that I do not and have never tried to get anyone to donate any food to any food banks or similar things. I believe criminal forgeries of my signature on contracts I've never even seen exist, where extremely malicious, bad faith actors are attempting to egregiously exploit the state of extreme deprivation I've been left in, to frame how I'm being treated currently as justified by occasional donations to food banks and similar things, as if that's something I've always been trying to work towards and or somehow greatly benefit from. That's completely false. And, for the record, as for the donations I've noticed more recently strangely coming in shortly after Kimmy's last stream, It's not even things anyone would ever have any particular reason to believe I'd like. It's literally just random, cheap, generic brand stuff. Stuff like spaghetti or canned sauces. Whoever's trying to act like I ever agreed to sell my soul in some manner where it's as if they're holding their end of the contract by donating to food banks seriously is subhuman filth to me. Belongs in prison or worse. And also, for the record, there's absolutely no food I at all consent to anyone specifically believing donating to food banks or similar appeases me, forces me to shut up, changes my position, and or offers anyone any real leverage over me. But let's take a moment and step back. Remember how Kimmy said she'd stream on Tuesday or Wednesday-ish? Kimmy didn't, but Jamie did for some strange reason. So Jamie's not only not doing well, but suddenly streaming when Kimmy was supposed to? That certainly doesn't seem like a coincidence to me. Jamie's basically exclusively been streaming on Sundays for ever since I don't even know how long, even before I started this podcast, and now suddenly, after I start exposing a bunch of heavily politically related stuff, she randomly streams on Tuesday? I suspect there's an energy of Kimmy, Jamie, and Celine that's nearly completely hidden from me spiritually, but Celine feels really uncomfortable about it and probably secretly has for quite some time already. And now let's take a look at Kimmy's more recent Thursday stream. It seems to me this extremely delusional and ungrateful fraud, Kimmy, seriously insists on pretending that she has some kind of insane leverage over me and she can try to act like she has some massive insight into my life that gives her some kind of rightful authority over me that she in reality doesn't. Because otherwise her unbelievably massive ego can't handle the reality that I've never shown her affection out of any actual indebtedness to her and or anyone else and or any kind of want, need, and or willingness to have some pathetically cucked submission position to her and or anyone else in my life. I have never and do not associate with the name Juniper. I have never and do not consent to be somehow represented as or treated as or seen as Kimmy's cat with that name. I suspect Kimmy's doing some weird metaphorical hallucination garbage of seeing Snowball as Celine and me as Juniper and using her streams to pretend that she's somehow a god to both me and Celine because she feels entitled to treating both of us like her pets. And she's trying to act like a god in both our lives by trying to act like she has any real authority long term to try to demand that I have to let her act like I should be cowering behind her every time I deal with Celine and basically let Kimmy rob me of my power and then use that for selfish gain entirely to my detriment against my consent in how she controls Celine and basically terrorizes Celine and then blames me for it. Alternatively, Kimmy's attempting to represent Big Skenger as Juniper and then trying to exploit diverging narratives that attempt to destiny swap me with Big Skenger as an extra bonus to her malicious mind games and egregious exploitation of my existence in an ongoing, increasingly criminal manner, increasingly egregiously, blatantly unapologetically. That's probably what's going on, if you ask me. This TT thing with Kimmy, messing around with how she says community, has only one connection I can draw. There's a staff at one building I know who told me her street name is T. That woman has some strange energy where it's almost like she's trying to force me to either want to be her boyfriend or accept her boyfriend's bad karma disproportionately greatly by doing very small gestures towards me, like maybe giving me coffee on a couple occasions. It's a dynamic where allowing her behavior throws me into that murderous destiny swap energy of trying to frame me as having a particular fixation with Middle Eastern women, the same preference of the person who I suspect I've been getting framed for the murder of by the white heart emoji energy from Arya. Essentially, the conclusion I'm seeing is the two cats Kimmy has and her weird sudden obsession with TT at the end of her name, of her cult, basically, is flaunting how she led to the murder of the person I'm being framed for the murder of, as well as the attempted murders of me that I'm still ongoing facing. However, it seems she feels more confident in flaunting it now because she's basically just revealing why Chloe deserves to be and will end up getting murdered as I expose the truth of everything and perhaps ultimately do end up getting the relationship with Kimmy that I've always wanted. This is the first time I've seen Kimmy even really imply that her Thursday streams have anything to do with someone being thirsty. I'm not sure if she was seriously trying to extremely passive-aggressively pretend, even now, that the feelings I've expressed for her are some kind of indebtedness or some kind of need to appease someone for some supposed leverage over me. But she's really going to learn the hard way how wrong she really is, if it's really that. The fact that Kimmy felt compelled to bring out some kind of cards and then liken them to Pokemon cards indicates to me that not only is Kimmy cucked by me, but she's so extremely cucked that she doesn't even have the courage or have the ability to have the benefit of actually bringing real Pokemon cards into the equation. Kimmy egregiously exploited her connection to Emaine indirectly, I imagine most likely extremely heavily through Jamie, to enable and facilitate Kimmy building the life she was trying to make with two pets working from home through exploiting me egregiously. This supports what I said in a past release about triple triangulation, where I suspected a prism of triangles of trust exists involving Emaine on one end, Kimmy on the other, and Jamie, Lily, and Arya connecting them. Perhaps an alternative manner of looking at it is that Kimmy bringing up Pokemon cards but not actually having them is indicative of her somehow having power over Emaine, I imagine likely through Celine. Still kinda dumb, since Emaine is still cucking Celine in that case. Ultimately, Emaine has absolutely zero real leverage over me, and I've never been trying to exploit her for anything, so I clearly have much more power than both Kimmy or Celine. That's why I can do stuff like just casually clown on that YouTuber Pegasus and then move on without caring. By the way, he mixed up XQC and Asmongold in one of his recent releases on his More Pegasus channel, which to me I feel indicates that my exertion of power over Emaine is causing her to get exposed for trying to exploit XQC through Asmongold and or vice versa. I imagine Hassan, Hamas, Diddy, Hiker exploiting Emaine and vice versa is putting both of them in increasingly difficult situations now because of all the exposing I'm doing. Actually, also, on that topic, Pegasus brought up Stephen, or should I say Cuxtony, although he normally doesn't, and he just sticks to talking about Hassan. I brought up Stephen in my last release on this podcast, and his following live stream, he randomly started off talking about pictures he took around the offline TV house being posted publicly on reviews on Google Maps or something, and then expressing concern about private videos of him touching himself getting leaked. That's not something I've ever been particularly interested in case that was at all in question. Also, I find it disturbing that Pegasus lumps in girls like Alinity, Amaranth, and Denims with ASMR creators. It seems Dan Clancy favors whispering on some sexual level similar to hot tub streams? What the hell? No wonder Twitch is so screwed up as a platform. I wouldn't classify Kimmy's content as anywhere even close to trashy hot tub streamers or someone who blatantly publicly supports Hassan, Hamas, Diddy, Piker. I feel like this whole Snowball and Juniper thing might be getting framed as Celine being Snowball and me being Juniper, but I interpret it more like Celine being Snowball and Big Skanger being Juniper, and me simply being too powerful for Kimmy to actually be able to disrespect me to the point of literally trying to personify me with a cat. She might want to hallucinate and pretend otherwise to feel powerful with her massive ego, but the reality will continue to speak for itself. In Kimmy talking about giving Snowball a bunch of treats to try to get her to play nice with Juniper, it seems Kimmy has been trying very hard to bribe Celine to keep cooperating with her. Perhaps Kimmy is even trying to destiny swap me and Celine against my consent to my detriment and trying to falsify apparently giving me treats as some kind of egregious defamation of me that she attempts to pretend means she has any real leverage over me. Kimmy's probably such a massive fraud, she's trying to act like her putting on lip gloss is some kind of treat for me. No, it forces me to have to deal with her garbage politics and egregious, extremely devious defamation of me that has brought me literally nothing but increasingly extreme pain and suffering I never wanted or deserved. And then, what is Kimmy talking about that she disappeared for 8 months? There's only one time in all the years I've followed Kimmy very closely online that she's ever actually disappeared for several months. I don't know if she was referring to her ASMR YouTube channel, but I've hardly paid any attention to that all along. I've only really focused on her Twitch channel and socials like Twitter and Instagram. I don't know what her ASMR YouTube channel disappearances would mean if they have some alternative meaning. And why is she saying she's changed? I don't see any even remotely adequate evidence to suggest Kimmy's changed at all in any meaningful manner. Getting another cat is what she was secretly planning to do for a long time, so her finally having it isn't actually an indication of her changing meaningfully somehow. She's just getting what the person she's already been for a long time has been already working for a long time to try to get. Just growing older versus actually getting more mature are two very different things. And again, Kimmy talking about going back to Grand Theft Auto role-playing. It seems this fraud seriously still believes I'm ever going to mess with that. And she thinks getting a cat means now I'm going to have to submit to her desires to cuck and control my life through that. Big mistake. But again, it seems she really wants to learn the hard way. I actually didn't watch the whole stream because I just got too mad after seeing Kimmy talking about it's entertaining watching people be people and trying to frame it essentially as I've only ever watched her content because it's some kind of reality TV show or something. No. Just no. I might go back to finish watching it later, but for now, I'm so mad I'm just going to finish what I already had for this release and worry about directly, extremely meticulously exposing Kimmy even more for the massive fraud she is later. I believe I've understood the real meaning behind why Kimmy thinks the microphone she uses for ASMR is so important. It's because of someone named Joel, who I knew with his Twitch username XReserved. His heavy involvement in communication leading up to and after around the time I ended up making an appearance on Paul Danino's livestream to call out Kimmy seems to make Joel somehow heavily relevant to everything. And he seems to manipulate the significance of what microphone Kimmy uses in order to attempt to further his own selfish agendas at my expense against my consent. For anyone wondering how I came to this suspicion, spiritually, I've had an energy of the same person in my energy who initially went by Joel the Scorpion, who is now Mike the Emperor. Most recently, he was talking about SpongeBob and being trapped in your imagination, which I feel indicates to me that Joel has been impersonating Edison's energy to have access to Kimmy's personal life in a manner where it seems I've now been given reason to suspect that Kimmy's strange obsession with SpongeBob has something to do with her family framing her as seriously being romantically and or sexually involved with her brother. I mean, it might not even be framing, and it might actually be real incest tendencies Kimmy has, for all I know. I don't know. But I know that it seems like those I once called family are framing me as having weird, perverted incest tendencies with Kristen that I know are most certainly completely false and entirely unsubstantiated with absolutely zero real evidence to prove them whatsoever. So I'm being cautious before confidently asserting Kimmy's in a different kind of scenario, especially since the subhuman filth I once called family appears to be attempting to weaponize Toy Story in a manner resembling how Kimmy's family appears to be weaponizing SpongeBob, but in an extremely perverted and warped manner where they're using something I never even liked instead of something like Kimmy's situation where she appears to actually like SpongeBob and even feel it formed a substantial part of her personality. Wait, maybe that means Kimmy did actually have sex with her brother. Ugh, I don't want to think about it. I'm not sure exactly why or how Kimmy links that with drinking and her current beverage she's enjoying or something along those lines, but I suspect it represents how Kimmy's secretly struggling with an unhealthy connection to alcohol, or perhaps trying to explain her past struggles with healthy moderation when it came to consuming alcohol, and I suspect what she was trying to get at is that her family's mistreatment of her made her feel very depressed, and that led to the unhealthy relationship with alcohol that Kimmy had or possibly still has. Anyways, I now believe that's how Kimmy and Jamie have been trying to endlessly, egregiously exploit me after trying to drive me crazy and act like they're my boss or manager or something like that, and claiming that I intentionally made a scene as some kind of scripted thing on Paul Danino's stream all those years ago, when in reality it was a true expression of my extremely deep distress and unhappiness. Given the fact that I recently saw Joel's energy try to label me Mike Jones, which I most certainly do not resonate with, I suspect that Kimmy, Jamie, and Joel are extremely heavily involved in enabling and facilitating egregious exploitation of my energy and existence to form other triangles of trust that ultimately try to put out hits on Elon and probably also Trump while pretending I was the one doing it. I believe what's currently happening is there are two main triangle of trust dynamics that Chloe is attempting to use to enable and facilitate her ongoing efforts to have me murdered. Through those, Chloe tried to so extremely egregiously exploit my energy that she seriously put a hit out on Elon through egregious exploitation of my energy that she hoped she'd absolutely decimated my resources and willpower to the point I wouldn't be able to defend against and would end up getting me murdered, and that's the source of the murderous white heart emoji energy from Arya. What I suspect will ultimately happen is Elon's energy will end up attacking Celine increasingly aggressively, possibly through Trump's energy, until Celine pushes it to land the hit on Chloe that she tried to kill me with by framing me for trying to put on Elon. As for the specifics of the two triangles of trust that Chloe has been attempting to weaponize against me directly, Chloe tried
to establish two separate but distinct triangles of trust that exploit the most vulnerable individuals who have ever been somehow in my life that would have been prone to being manipulated into working towards having me murdered. Mary, Chloe, and Celine is one of them, like I've already said. The other is Kristen, Chloe, and Monica. Ultimately, Chloe's been trying to paint extremely different pictures of who I am to each of them. Her intent was to so extremely egregiously defame me to Mary, Celine, Kristen, and Monica that they would attack each other in a very particular manner where it would always come back to Chloe to defend herself, and then the more pressure they put on her, the more she'd try to manipulate all of them to believe that I was the real problem, and all that murderous energy they felt from her was really me doing it to her all along, and most likely she was framing it all as being for the extremely shallow, selfish, petty, toxic reasons that she was actually trying to murder me all along. Literally, fully, consciously, and intentionally, criminally, murderously weaponizing projection with absolutely unconditional, unrestrained, malicious intent towards me. And I believe I've figured out why as well. I've been seeing increasingly prominent energies with the laughing, crying emoji. That's the profile picture of the @AWK20,000 Twitter account, often coming with heavy Lily energy influence. Talked about scumbags that were stealing from me and exploiting me extremely egregiously, now blaming me because making money is getting increasingly difficult for them, when in reality they did it to themselves. Apparently 2 or 3 liars claiming to be my exes have been spying on my energy and trying to steal from me constantly and destroy me and block me from everything good in life, but are getting slowed down because Michael is protecting me somehow, and 1 or more criminals attacking me are mad about that. Seems at least one of these massive frauds claiming to be my ex have some prominent involvement with the Tate brothers. Rachel and Emily were explicitly mentioned in that energy, but clearly it hasn't exposed nearly enough people yet, because I've only ever given any significant amount of energy or attention that anyone could consider actually even remotely plausible as indicative of someone being my ex to Kimmy and Chloe. At this point, I suspect very much non-trivial involvement of Valkyrie and Extra Emily in the existence of the Twitter or X accounts @ShatteredPasta and @AWK20,000, which I'm being egregiously defamatorily framed as wanting to exist and or receiving any actual benefit somehow as the result of the existence of. In reality, I believe they've contributed to extremely egregiously exploiting my energy in order to entirely non-consensually frame me as trying to put a hit out on Elon and possibly also Trump, and the conspiracy and attempted murder of me, and the various other crimes and gossip going along with that, which led up to it and are still being inflicted on me relentlessly. I've been hearing things in my energy that someone criminally violating my life believes that they could embody what they believe to be the peak of my potential. They thought they could steal my life from me like that. I believe when I look at the @AWK20,000 account, it's probably what that energy was talking about. I feel like it's attempting to frame me as some kind of extremely arrogant, pretentious person that gets some kind of twisted, sadistic pleasure from laughing at people in their faces and making them feel horrible and, constantly destroying their egos for some kind of disgusting, perverted pleasure of feeling better than them. It gives these really gross vibes, like I get some really perverted pleasure in making people feel hurt and attacked and unsafe and insecure, which is completely false. While I certainly do not feel bad about humbling someone that's been trying to hurt me extremely badly, I don't get some kind of twisted pleasure from making someone feel bad just because I can, or something like that. And then the name. I don't know if there's some deeper meaning behind it, but at least on the surface level, it seems to indicate some kind of attitude that sort of seems to me like there's someone that likes to kind of kick people out of groups or kind of ostracize people practically for fun. That's definitely not the kind of person I am or ever have been, but it certainly would explain why everyone seems to hate me for no reason if for some reason they were left under the impression I was actually that kind of person. And even the @ handle, why something that seems like awkward 20,000? It's like acknowledging that I was put in an extremely awkward, uncomfortable, unpleasant position when I was ever put in that position of signing that contract with Dixon. I was forced under duress to agree to for the $20,000 that it feels like that contract is trying to humiliate me or call me out for or something. As if to say that's why they feel entitled to have stolen access to it from me because of me having signed that contract or something. I don't know who's behind the account, but if it's on Elon's platform, that means Elon might have only even really been okay with it because it's forced to acknowledge the kind of conditions within which it's operating based on a foundation of, meaning he himself likely considers it to put him in a really awkward position. So even if he's jealous of me to whatever extent, I don't believe it's an exceptionally hateful act from him to allow that account on his platform. Although, for some reason, I highly doubt all the criminals trying to endlessly exploit me and ultimately get me murdered have portrayed that correctly. I get the feeling that whoever's been trying to destroy my life has attempted to justify such egregious, immoral, and often even criminal acts towards me by attempting to frame me as ungrateful for not sucking up to anyone and everyone necessary to attempt to get access to that Twitter account and or benefit from it somehow. Basically, they believe I deserve death because they're such massive haters that I'm not a massive fraud desperately in need of their validation for all the egregious wrongs they've enabled and facilitated being inflicted on me entirely undeservedly. For the record, beyond protecting myself from any even potential harm or even general detriment occurring to my existence as a result of it, I don't know or particularly care who owns, operates, or has any kind of control over that account and or any benefits stemming from its existence. I obviously can't claim it's blatantly defaming me or criminally impersonating me, since there's nothing about it that indicates it's blatantly, publicly attempting to pretend to be me. But I believe that one or more people lying that I particularly care to get access to the account and or benefit somehow from its existence are attempting to hold that over my head as some kind of falsified leverage over me and or some kind of reason to attempt to justify continued suppression and sabotage of my life and perhaps especially my efforts to get more attention and recognition on this podcast. If I had to take a wild guess, Chloe's probably thinking she can try to act like I find any real incentive in having control over that Twitter account at AWK20,000 and or the influence she might have to get people to bring attention to it and or what it brings attention to. I know Chloe was literally ready and so fully aware of her intent to fake my death and force me into an extremely miserable life, robbed of my soul, because during the time I was living with John, I gathered evidence of Chloe going as far as posting a picture frame on Instagram publicly that looked like a funeral frame for a picture of someone deceased. I know Kimmy was collaborating with her to maliciously falsify my death, entirely to my detriment against my consent as well, because as John and Edwin tried to coerce me into accepting some job offer, Edwin claimed he pulled strings in his government connections to get for me in what was no doubt an extremely exploitative video game development job. They wanted me to slave away at and then have all my work stolen from me, probably by one or more scumbags in offline TV and friends. Kimmy started talking about going to a friend's birthday literally the same day John and Edwin tried the hardest to coerce me to go to an interview for that job. After I refused, I also noticed that Kimmy also never mentioned that supposed birthday she was supposed to go to ever again either. I very recently noticed Jamie and or Lena energy lying that I'm in a relationship currently and sense a conversation incoming from them that will provide some kind of clarity I supposedly need. The foundation of me even being in a relationship currently is an egregious lie, and one that, as far as I'm concerned, I'm absolutely convinced that Jamie and Lena both have been extremely egregiously exploiting through extensive divination abuse, specifically targeting me for a long time. Some final notes, perhaps more politically related. I don't identify as Pablo, and I'm not particularly looking for private investigator help, but I am frustrated at the system that allows people to be manipulated, abused, and trafficked, and I don't believe people should suffer in silence, nor that powerful people should be actively participating in corruption. I never believed justice is optional or a privilege. It's a right, and I've never been trying to make anyone pay for anything that should be free, particularly when it comes to legal defense against unlawful behavior. I document my work and take credit for my own work because I also believe that I deserve that credit and I'm objectively most suitable to utilize that power if I earned it on my own. Nobody has been paying me anything to hurt them or others. My lack of active, extremely aggressive pursuit of helping everyone at my expense while I'm already suffering immensely beyond the capability of words to accurately convey, with hitmen coming after me every other day, is not at all, and has never been at all, intended as indicative of any positions contradictory to these things. Additionally, I do not agree with the World Health Organization's pandemic agreement, legally binding treaty, and its ability to give unelected, unaccountable UN bureaucrats the right to overwrite laws, rights, and freedoms in Canada. I agree that Canada should withdraw from it promptly. Also, I never authorized any contracts to GC strategies, regardless of capitalization of the entity. In some instances, it might be incorporated, and in others, unspecified, but my assertion of non-involvement applies regardless of the variations. Finally, I don't particularly associate with being a divine masculine and or divine feminine, whatever those things even really mean. I just consider myself a god. Definitely not a regular human, and definitely not a demonic entity. I don't know if it's related to that stuff or how exactly, but I'm also not looking for some god prompt type thing for ChatGPT and or any other AI. I've found ChatGPT to be plenty adequate for anything I'd use it for, simply by navigating things how I naturally myself come up with prompts. I hardly even use ChatGPT and or any other AI in general.